All right. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you here. And we always start our conversations with a personal check-in. So I'd love for you to share with us where you're joining us from today and just how you're doing at the levels of body, heart, and mind.
Yeah, I'm joining you from Asheville, North Carolina. I live in the beautiful Smoky Mountains here. I've been here probably about 8 years. And so, I feel quite fortunate and privileged to be so close to nature and be able to live in, one of the most beautiful areas of North Carolina. So I'm native to North Carolina, grew up here, and I lived in Colorado and Korea for a while, and sort of came back 20 some years ago, and I've stayed in the sort of the area I grew up in.
Nice. Where were you in Colorado? I'm in Colorado.
Yeah, I lived in Denver. My wife went to DU for her graduate work, and so we were there for her graduate work. And I lived in Inglewood, not too far from DU. And I loved being in Colorado and miss it. I got to go back and visit and do some skiing this year, so it's nice to go back and visit.
Great. And there's a lot of crossover between here and North Carolina.
Yeah, I miss sort of the green trees and that especially the winters here still are a bit green. So and the climate's a little bit more mild sometimes. So.
I get that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how are you doing at the levels of body, heart, and mind today?
I feel really great. I'm really excited. I turned 57 just a couple of weeks ago, and so I sort of didn't imagine this stage of my life being as good as it is, and I get to spend a lot more time mentoring other trainers, and have been able to work with Black Therapist Rock for the past 4 years and mentoring people of color and BIPOC folks to become trainers, and more having more trainers of color and in the community, and being able to offer those to their clients. So I feel really blessed to be working in areas that are close to my heart and mentoring other trainers. So I feel really great. I feel really fortunate. My daughter's coming home from college. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my daughter's coming home from college. She's finished her first year at Carolina, and so we've got some adventures planned for the summer. So I'm very excited.
Right, and I appreciate all that you're doing for the BIPOC community and IFS. And Crystal Jones is coming on the podcast. I'm actually interviewing her after this, but she'll air in a different month.
Crystal's a very wonderful trainer and addition to the trainer community. So it's fantastic to have her on the show.
And so this would be a good segue just to talk more about IFS. And this audience has heard me speak about it before, but for anyone who's just joining us for the first time, I'm wondering if you can just give us like a short synopsis of what IFS, or internal family systems, is.
Yeah, so I think it's a way of navigating our internal system, and due to various issues, trauma, or just sort of growing up in our culture, we develop these ways of protecting ourselves, and they become quite elaborate in having strategies and feelings and ideas, and so that's kind of what we call parts. And these parts that really form ways of protecting ourselves tend to be more fear-based, and due to that, they block more of our core essence, our core self. And so the more trauma that we kind of endure, the more elaborate our protective system has to become to survive. And so we, as a byproduct of that, we begin to lose, touch with our core nature. And so IFS is a way of alleviating those parts of ourselves that are focused on survival, and helping update those parts and come more into the present, and also relinquishing what we call our core self, our ability to be compassionate and connected. We relinquish that constraint of ourself. So there's more of the ability to be present in the moment and to be connected and have compassion for ourselves and others. So I think that's the emergence of that sense of a self is one of the reasons I think the IFS has become such a popular model. Is it not only heals trauma, but it helps our self be more engaged and more the leader of our life.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about how it's not just a therapeutic model, but it's really a paradigm for living.
Yeah,
Yeah. Go
yeah, I
ahead.
think yeah, I think it's a way of helping us navigate, like who's driving the bus, so to speak. Who's driving our system, and so ultimately therapy should help us be more in touch with our core self driving our system. I think that's what most people look for when they go to therapy is the ability to navigate their life in more clear and intentional ways. So not only is it kind of help with that, but it also helps us feel deeply more connected to nature or spirituality or a sense of connectiveness to something greater than ourselves, however that shows up for people.
And when and how and why did you first get involved with IFS?
I was at so I became a therapist about 25. I think my aunt, who was my fifth grade teacher, told me that if I could just do everything orally and speak to people, that I would be just fine. So it kind of became the path I took. And talking to people, counseling was a really good way to do things verbally. And what greater way to make a living than be able to sit and talk to people all day, which is kind of what I love to do anyway. So I'd already been a therapist for about 10 years. I was studying with David Kaloff. David's a parts expert, and he and Dick were friends early on. And so I've been studying with David for about 10 years. And I was very interested. So when Dick's book came out on internal family system, it was very much in alignment of what I'd already been studying. But it had sort of a way of really helping the self emerge more fully, which is something I was at the Evolution in Psychotherapy conference. I was watching a man named Irvin Polster, who was a Gestalt expert at the time, do these beautiful sessions where he would sit and talk to people, and it felt like their core essence just emerged on stage. And I remember following him around the entire conference going, how does he do that? I have to know how to do that. It was some of the most beautiful work I'd ever seen. So then when I met Dick and saw his first demo, it was very similar to what Irvin was doing. It's really inviting our essence to come forward. And, and I was like, that's what actually psychotherapy is supposed to be. Not sort of getting us more in touch with our neuroses, but helping us emerge more fully into our sort of core essence. So when the combination of seeing Irvin and then seeing Dick's work, I was sold that this was really the path of what I wanted to do with folks as a psychotherapist.
And how has this work impacted you personally since that time? Like what are some of the bigger shifts that you've noticed in yourself?
I think I was a pretty serious guy. When my mother was sick when I was a kid, and so I kind of became a parentified child, had dyslexia, so I had to work really hard in school to make good grades. The option for me was to be a bricklayer or a pastor. Those are my two options. So I kind of found a middle ground. But I was a pretty serious guy, and kind of uptight when I first became a therapist. I was probably kind of burned out within the first 3 or 4 years. So I didn't know kind of how to relax very well and have fun. And So it's really relaxed a lot of my anxiety and seriousness, and I learned to play a lot more and enjoy life, and enjoy being with people. A lot of my shyness is relaxed, and my fear of other people is relaxed. So, and I also had a lot of my own trauma that growing up with a mom that was pretty ill at a very young age, and had a lot of emotional troubles because of that. And, a dad that was a bit loving and kind, but kind of checked out. So I had my own traumas to work out as well. So, and it's helped me a lot in my own marital relationship to feel connected and present. So yeah, I've just done a lot of my own internal work to kind of heal from those early traumas.
Yeah, I would never I'm just meeting you for the first time, but I've also just experienced your video teachings, but I would never say that you never would come across as a serious person to me,
Yeah,
an overly
that's
serious person.
Yeah, I think that's a testament to the work. I think one of my close friends once said, do you read anything besides psychotherapy books? Like, do you do anything else besides study and read psychotherapy books? Like, you need to read my friend got me into reading fantasy novels, and science fiction. So, so yeah, it's been a lot of work to get less serious, in my life. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know a big area of focus for you is the inner critic. And I've heard wonderful things about the critic camp that you lead. And I'm wondering if you can tell us more about, like, what is the critic camp, and what is the inner critic from the IFS perspective?
Well, I think that, and this is one of the kind of notes that you sent me beforehand, but I think I was watching a lot of what you sort of describe in mainstream, psychology of trying to get rid of something, trying to expel something, like tame the inner critic, how to defeat your inner critic. And I began to noticing that the inner critic tends to be kind of characterized as a special type of part. And so as I was witnessing a lot of things that really didn't fit with my own experience of my own internal critic, but also as I'm working with other clients, I think there's a lot of myths in our society that doesn't really help us very much in working with it, that it somehow we turn it into some type of specialized part. And so it's kind of seeing that and tracking my own work of my own critic and my own clients. The way I see it is it's really a protector, is that just like every other part, it tends to be a protector that has a major role, major function. But it learned a harsh way to protect us. And fear is a major motivator. So, if we're afraid of failing, like I think I got through graduate school with the fear of failing and fear of having to go back and live where I grew up and lay bricks. So fear is a major motivator. It's very loud, very persistent. And their inner critic finds a way of tapping into that motivation to drive us towards not being weak, or not fear of failing, or fear of being rejected or abandoned or unloved, so it taps into that motivation to kind of drive us. And that works. And when I worked a lot with artists, and especially with stage fright, I was on the faculty of the drama faculty at North Carolina School of the Arts, and for stage fright, this fear would drive the students to stay up all night to remember their lines, or to act, or to, they would stay in the music studio for 8 hours. This fear of failing would drive them, but then their system would break down when they got on stage. So the critics, so the critic becomes a major sort of driver, a major player, but it uses a harsh way to do that. And so I see it as any other part. It just has a different strategy, and one that is pretty persistent and dominant in our system.
And most of the people who listen to this are women. Not all, but most are women. And that this is just a common problem that women come to in my practice.
Yeah.
And so I think hearing this can help reframe that it's a protector and it's driving us through fear.
Yeah.
And what are, so given this, like, what are some ways to work with the inner critic, or to maybe just to get it to be more of an ally?
Yeah. Well, I think the inner critic work's really hard to do by yourself. It's really hard to befriend a part of us that's being mean to us. It's like, it's sometimes they even feel like a bully. So it's hard to kind of get warm and cuddly to a bully, in our system, so it's really hard to do by yourself. One of the things I teach in Critic Camp is for therapists to have the capacity to interact directly with the critic, what we call direct access, and a lot of times it does kind of take a therapist, a skilled therapist, to begin to interact with that part, to find out what it's afraid of specifically, how it learned to do this way of protecting. The couple of questions I ask is, who does it mimic? My own inner critic, when I was working with it, kind of mimicked my football coach, and sounded a lot like Fred, and was my football coach's name, and acted like Fred. And when I began to get to know the part, I'm like, why are you acting like Fred? Like nobody. I didn't even like my football coach very much. Like, why? Well, that man got you to be successful. He got you to work hard. He got you to be disciplined. He got you to be successful, and that's what I'm here about. So it was mimicking someone that kind of helped me be successful in certain ways, but kind of took on this gruff, no stop, no nonsense, kind of approach. So I think so it kind of helps to learn more about the inner critic, what it's afraid of, what its motivation is, and then often whose energy or style of trying to motivate us, where did it pick up this way of doing it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's for these more deeply entrenched parts or more extreme parts. We need someone else to help to hold the space. And like you're saying, with direct access, like to have the therapist be able to speak directly to that part, just to help to create some more space between the client and the
Exactly.
part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also to kind of help us see it as kind of more, it's meant to be more than just you know, a negative attribute in our system. That the critics often want us to be what we're capable of being. They kind of, I think one of the ways they form is that developmentally at a certain age, we see the discrepancy between how we are and what's possible. And that discrepancy at a young age is hard to navigate that discrepancy. So we take on this fearful drive to try to navigate that gap that we see. And there's always a gap between how we actually are and actually what our potential is. It's naturally there. But the part comes along to try to help us close that gap between our ideal self and our actual self.
Yeah, I think that's helpful to highlight the gifts of a part that can seem challenging. And just like you were saying with your critic part, how it took on the voice of your football coach, who was really just propelling you towards greater excellence. Like there's a lot of benefit in that. And I'm sure that helped you not just with your football, but through other areas of your life too. And the same is true for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Quitting and giving up wasn't an option, so, it's, so it did help in those moments where, I felt like giving up, or I felt like something was too hard.
Yeah. And so as we go deeper into the process with support of getting to know the inner critic, getting to know, how it learned to do this, who it's mimicking, um, what it's protecting, what is the possibility for the critic to kind of evolve into or to transform into over time?
Yeah, I think the potential is that the critic can form into a really empowering advisor. Because I think we have certain parts that are kind of the major players in our system. And because that critic is noticing the discrepancies, of ideally, where we can be and what we can achieve, it can be a major advisor in kind of helping us, recognize that, formulate a plan of growth, and be an advisor. And I think it's also, we need certain parts that kind of tell us the truth about things, and help us when other parts have us deviating from our own sense of integrity. So it has a lot of potential to be an inner advisor, an inner consultant. And the motivation of the critic is to be more effective. So the harshness, even though it's effective initially, over time it's counterproductive. So there's a motivation for the critic to be effective. So there's a lot of potential in that part, being a really inner advisor, and kind of helping us, navigate these areas where there is discrepancy of where we currently are and where we can be. It
Mhm.
just has to learn to not do it in a harsh way. The other ways are more empowering.
So it's like it can become an inner ally for, it's closing that gap
Yeah. Yeah.
between who we are and who we want to be, or how we're showing up and how we want to show up.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. And I think so, developing this relationship to the part, once we can kind of get a little space from it and kind of, help it not be so harsh, we can begin to develop this relationship with it where the part itself can learn how effective, an empowering way of encouraging us can be.
Yeah. And can you speak about perfectionism as well? Because I know it can be similar, part related part to the inner critic, and I know that's a common one as well.
Yeah. I don't know what the motivation is. I have daughters, and I notice perfectionism in them at times. Um, the drive to be good, the fear of not being good, the fear of not being liked or having someone be angry at them. Um, one of the things I say to my daughters when they were young is like, try to get in a little trouble today. Don't be so good, and they would kind of roll their eyes like, yeah, right, Dad. So I don't know what that drive is, but I know it's, there's a lot of perfectionism in our society around how you look and how you're perceived, and how, what type of car you drive, and so there's a lot of drive, and I think it gets attached to survival, that we just, if we're not perfect in some ways, we won't be loved. And I think the biggest fear for human beings is to be rejected and unloved. So there's a attachment to surviving and being loved and cared about, and being of something of value, that gets attached to perfectionism. And then I think it kind of takes on a life of its own, because there's always a discrepancy, between, our ideal self and, kind of being human, and that, somehow that part develops a really keen eye on that discrepancy. It's, how we look, or how we speak, or our body image, or, how we're perceived by others. So there's plenty of ammunition for that part to load up with, to, they kind of come at us. There's plenty of discrepancies around just being human that I think people are trying to navigate.
Yeah. And kind of the more healed, evolved version of the perfectionist, is that similar as the inner critic? Just kind of more of this advisor
Yeah, I
role?
think it. Yeah, I think it has an advisor role. I think it's important that we can imagine what's possible. Because I think there's a drive for us to kind of meet what our potential is, or, and so that there's a natural drive for that. So I think it can definitely be helped with that. I think there is a lot of work in some of our younger parts that have embodied perfectionism, embodied the belief that our worth is, and our lovability is attached to something conditional. and depending on kind of how we are, or even not just how we're parented, but just in a society, that our worth is something conditional. And so that's a burden that these exiles carry, that that we're not loved just for being a human being, that we have to do something of worth and to be lovable, so that, I think that's a fear and a burden that also drives underneath the perfectionism, is and I think that becomes sort of a survival threat to our system. So I think there's a lot of healing that has to take place around those early burdens that are carried, that that we're not just lovable for just being a human being.
Right. And just coming to a place of really knowing deep down that we're worthy of love and goodness just because we exist, and that we don't
Yeah,
need to uphold certain standards just to be worthy of that.
right. Yeah, just through being a human being, and you know, being the offspring of our ancestors. So.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so we spoke at the beginning of this conversation about this concept in IFS of self energy, which brings a new dimension into this psychotherapeutic model that isn't present in a lot of others. And can you speak more about what is self energy?
Um, I think that's this one. I kind of say this is something people kind of discover themselves. That it's a bit like, it's the language will always um, be reductionistic as we describe something as vast as, in some ways, the kind of the numinous aspects of our being. So given that the language is reductionistic, we'll kind of give it a try. But we think of it in terms of certain qualities of our being, like compassion, particularly connectivity, calmness, courage. And we have sort of these 8 C's that are kind of indicators of self energy. And so there's a natural motivation in human beings to feel connected. There's a natural movement of compassion that we have when we see suffering in other people. Oftentimes we have a greater amount of compassion for other people than we do ourselves. It's easier for us to maybe feel loving towards our children, or even my dog that's here keeping us company here. It's easier to feel that warmth or tenderness towards others than to shine it on ourselves. So we tend to have more of the harsh parts of ourselves that are driving our own system. So I think of in terms of open-heartedness, of care, compassion, um, tenderness, creativity, imagination, inspiration. So I track it more in terms of energies within myself, and how is my being sort of in alignment with those energies, and how are those sort of manifesting, you know, either towards my own complex system or towards others. So that's how I track it. It's also a receptor for imagination and creativity and intuition and spontaneity. So it's a receptor for those larger energies that are kind of universal or archetypical.
Yeah, I've heard you say um, that IFS helps us to shift from fear-based living to inspiration-based living. I think
Yeah.
that's a really good way to frame it, to summarize it.
Yeah. And if I started sort of tracking a little bit, like how much during my day is my decisions and choices and engagement circled around a should, which is shoulds tend to be fear-based, or ought to, or I'm afraid of what will happen if I don't, and I for a while I was, it felt like 80% of my day was, if I don't take out the garbage, my wife won't be happy with me. If I don't feed a dog, I'll feel guilty. So how much these shoulds are really driving my choices. And as I began to track it more, and began to shift towards what do I want? What am I inspired towards? What am I, what's the excitement, motivation, and how am I carrying that through? I began to sort of shift my system to be a little bit more, inspire based, and am I living towards, kind of what I really want and inspired towards. And so I do a lot more art and I play a lot more games with my friends and, and sit on the deck with my wife a lot more. So, there's a big shift that's happened.
Yeah, sounds really wonderful.
Yeah.
And with self energy, I've also heard you say that it's developmental, and that there's a way that in childhood it's not fully online, but it starts to take form more excuse me, more and more throughout our lives. Can you say more about that?
Well, I think there's a lot of self energy that's embodied in children. There's a natural motivation towards connection. There's a natural curiosity, but we also, as we embody it more, we also develop greater skill towards self-soothing. So emotions are quite raw for children, and the ability to kind of self-regulate. They need to receive quite a lot of self-regulation and care, in order to self-regulate. So we sort of grow this capacity to manage our emotions, our strong emotions, and strong emotions derive from needs. When needs are not met, we naturally feel distress. And so as we sort of grow the ability to be with our distress and also to form strategies to care for our distress, in that sense, it kind of grows in the way that it interacts with the system. And the more we're able to sort of receive that kind of care versus repression, as for children, the ability to they're able to internalize that and have and relate to their own distress in ways that is more caring towards that. Their stress is there for a reason. They're not distressed because they're being bad or or being needy. They're distressed because there's a need that's really clearly there, and there's distress for a good reason. So how they relate to that is in a sense of how I think that the capacity of self energy being integrated in our system gets more complete as we grow. If we grow in sort of the right sort of community and the right sort of conditions, and what's called a caring parenting approach.
Yeah, so the more that we mature and are able to hold ourselves in our challenges, our challenging feelings, the more that the self energy can develop, mature, take hold within
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, and be integrated versus eclipsed. I think that as we develop our survival step mechanisms, it gets more eclipsed as we have to rely more on our protective ways of surviving.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love the analogy of like clouds and the blue sky, or clouds in
Yeah,
the sun, that it's IFS is a lot of just helping us to see the clouds in the sky, to notice, okay, there's clouds here, and to
mhm.
help to come back to more of that blue sky.
Yeah, yeah. That one of my teachers, Stephen Foster, would say, human beings would be better off if they think of themselves as weather systems, and that the weather is sort of constantly changing. There's not a dominant way, but how we relate to the weather, how we relate to the cloudiness or the fogginess or the turmoil, how we relate to that is a big indicator of how well it regulates and can,
Yeah,
we can be with what's happening in our emotional system.
yeah. And just as those protective mechanisms start to relax more, there's less judgment. and
Yeah.
harshness towards however we're feeling or whatever we're experiencing.
Yeah. Yeah. Some days are just stormy days, but there's not kind of I have some days I'm like, I don't even know why today's a stormy day. I just feel more emotional, I feel more vulnerable, I feel more irritable, and it's a bit of an overcast day. And how am I relating to my system when it is that way, and allows that to move on through.
Yeah. So speaking of that, just your way of connecting with your own parts, do you have a particular um, practice or way that you do that each day? Is there something specific
Um,
that you do?
I'd love to say that I was like a really dedicated meditation person, or, I'd love to say I do yoga every day. I did for a while. I had a very dedicated meditation practice for a while. And, I primarily play a lot of tennis, and, and I get to have a lot of fun. And I also kind of get to observe my system in action, so when my heart beats above 100 beats a minute, I'm much more aggressive, and my energy is really high, so how do I be calm in a really active state, so I observe myself a lot playing tennis, and so the sort of inner game of tennis, but I also get to play with my friends, and be very active. Spend a lot of time in nature and hiking and walking and just sitting. I have hummingbirds that visit me this time of year, so I love to sort of sit out and see the hummingbirds. But I probably in the morning, I do some check-in in the morning around what are my predominant players in the morning and who's active, and I may spend some time mapping, kind of if I'm distressed, what parts are active and what story do they have, and parts really create a story, and that story really feels real, and to be able to sort of unblend from whatever story is being created about myself or other people, and be aware of what story I'm telling myself, is probably one of my major practices, is to be aware of that in the morning. And I may do some journaling and mapping. I'm very big. If you've trained with me, I teach mapping and invite you to do mapping after every meditation. So I think being able to track and map our parts, and seeing how they transform and change over time, is a really valuable tool.
Can you say more about mapping? I know it's a big topic, but just for those who are hearing that for the first time, just what that might look like for them to get started with it.
Yeah, I do mapping some with my daughter. Especially when she's younger, she has an IFS therapist now, but of her own. But a lot of times we do it. We might use. I like to use chalk pastels. I love the my iPad and the Procreate app, which my daughter introduced me to. And so we just sort of go inside and focus on whatever it is, a feeling, sensation, thought, anything that we notice, something that's troubling us. And then we just inquiry how that wants to be represented on the page. Does it want to have a color? Does it want to have a shape, a word, an image? And then we may just kind of go through what's present and how it wants to be represented on the page, and trying to relax any parts of us feel like we got to be a great artist, or it's got to look a certain way, but just see if we can get it externalized in some way. One of a dear couple that I am friends with, she has lots of figurines. She's a sand tray, so she will kind of, if they're in an argument, she will take her sand tray figurines and put them on the table, and that represents her parts, and her husband will go and find a couple, and he'll put his on the parts, and on the table. And so then they let it kind of sit for a little while, and then they go back and talk about what parts, are kind of there on the table that are active in their argument. So anything that kind of helps you externalize, and get a little bit of space with it, get a little bit of recognition. The most difficult thing is to try to name what we're experiencing, and to try to get a little sense of what it is and what's active and what's got it distressed. And, if we can get to what needs underneath that, then it helps us befriend it more. So, but I like to, use color and image, and sometimes I'll use Google Images, and I'll, if I'm feeling grumpy, I'll look through Google Images and see if I can sort of find it. I might type in grumpy at the Google image and see if there's an image that kind of captures, my experience. And then I may ask, how do I feel towards it? And then there's another feeling that comes from that, so I might find an image that represents that. And I pull that into a Word document and let it sit on my desktop for a little while, and and kind of see if there's more I need to get to know about it.
Yeah, you're inspiring me to. I only do mapping every once in a while, but to bring it in as more of a regular part of my life.
And I think what I've noticed a lot is parts tend to cluster around certain events. Like I look at my credit card, and I look at my bank account, and there's a clustering of parts that tends to have assigned themselves to that financial issue, or I look at my parenting. If there's a parenting, challenge, there's a set of parts that kind of prescribe themselves to being enrolled as advisors or even leads around my parenting. So parts tend to cluster a bit around life challenges, so if you kind of have that trailhead, as Dick talks about it, and use that trailhead as a ping in your system to see who is clustered around that, and then see which part of us has assigned themselves to that role. So some parts automatically kind of, like I have a part that's assigned itself as making sure I'm never homeless, and that's somehow that part took on that job. I don't even know where it got that worry, but it's like, okay, we are not going to be homeless no matter what, and so it'll emulate some fear in my system around you can't pay your bills. And, so knowing that part's what's driving my anxiety. And then what's the fear underneath that.
Yeah, that's so true. They cluster around these bigger topics, bigger events. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Would you be willing to lead us through a little guided parts meditation just to help listeners start to connect with parts that are present now?
Yeah, so we could, so usually the way I start a meditation is to invite people to, to pull out a pen and paper and, their journal. So to be able to kind of pull that out, because we want to be able to capture, we do this little inquiry, and that thing that we capture is pretty persistent. It's not a one-off, it's pretty persistent. So to be able to really kind of gather that information and track it. So I invite people to get a pen and paper together so they can just sort of jot that down. And as we just turn inside, we often think of inside as we got to go somewhere deep in our unconscious, and a lot of these parts we're talking about are really in the subconscious. They're not very far away. They're often, on our shoulder or whispering in our ear. So we don't have to go very far to be able to access our internal system. It's not that we have to go deep inside. I think we just have to turn our attention, to ourself, from the outside world to ourself, and begin to notice what's present right now, and as you kind of make that turn just a little bit, focusing on your own system, there are several parts that are accompanying us most of the time. And those are the ones that tend to try to see if we're valuable, or that we have some worth, or that we're functioning in a way that's going to keep us lovable, or keep us relevant. So if we just kind of turn a bit towards that, we can track and see if there's a little fear or anxiety or trepidation or worry. So parts that kind of have us on edge. So we can just kind of notice any type of fear, even if it's just small amounts of it. Just noticing kind of how it may be in your system. Does it have a sensation or felt sense in your body? Is there a bit of a commentary about what you should be doing, ought to be doing. Or even like a vigilance that you're kind of hyper aware of something that might happen. Or if there's kind of a recalling of a story of something that has happened that you wanted to be different. I should have said this or should not have said that. So as we just take a little inventory, like what's present, and see if we kind of notice without having to force anything. Like, where's our attention? Is it kind of in the past or the future? We can notice if there's a protective quality to any of that, a way of trying to keep us safe, or keep us lovable, making sure that we're not too alone or isolated. Just noticing the protective nature of any of those parts that are there. And just noticing if there's a slowing down that happens when you notice. Just slow down a little bit, get quieter. As we notice, sometimes our breath can get a little deeper. And even become a little bit more present to the present moment. In the process of befriending, we can maybe just notice that none of those parts mean to cause us trouble. They don't mean to cause us pain or anxiety, or they're just trying to survive. They're just trying to prevent something bad from happening, or make sure that we're okay in some way. So they don't mean to cause us trouble. So befriending is just sometimes that beginning of recognizing that it's just protective. It's just doing what it learned to do in some way to protect us, not cause us trouble. Even if it's anxiety or even if it's harshness, it doesn't mean to be causing us trouble, just trying to help us survive. As we recognize that, sometimes we can soften towards those parts, even if they're causing us distress. We can soften towards that. Right now, don't worry about fixing it. We're just kind of doing a little inventory of who's there, who's in our system, who's active. If you're acknowledging that they're just there to protect, you might get this little spaciousness or calmness that happens. Maybe just a slowing down. And if we hang out here longer, we might begin to hear from our system, like we might hear what their fears are, or they're afraid what happen if they're not doing their job, or afraid what happen if the anxiety isn't so strong. We might begin to hear the fears of the parts more. We might kind of be informed by our system, like noticing what's being communicated to us. And that would be the beginning stages of being able to care for some of our more vulnerable aspects, or our protectors, is to care for them. We have to hear them in order to care for them. Sometimes it's a little challenge to get our figuring it out parts to relax, so we can hear from them rather than prescribing to them. So we have to relax our figuring it out parts a bit to just hear from our system. What do they want us to know as we tune into the way that we protect ourselves? Whatever you've noticed is really valuable, even if it's just a little trying to figure it out so hard that you can't hear anything else, but trying to think your way through it. That's a valuable part to get to know. So whatever you've gotten to know is valuable. Just taking a moment to appreciate any aspects of your system that has presented itself to you in any way. And just noticing it's not too far away. We just have to pause and listen. I don't have to go anywhere deep. Just pause and reflect. And when you're ready, you can just come back and take a moment to jot down anything that you noticed. You just took a moment just to pause and tune in for a little bit. So I'm curious, Sarah, if you did you have to go very far to find any parts, or?
No, I usually don't.
That's true for most of us. I think we
Yeah.
use this idea of going inside, and people think we got to go somewhere deep, or we got to get into a meditative position and light my candles, and and
Yeah.
go inside. It's not very far. It's not far
Yeah.
away.
And just a lot are just so on the surface.
Yeah, yeah. Especially a lot of these protectors really ride on the surface of our consciousness.
Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, great.
I always find parts meditations to be so helpful.
Yeah, I think that's probably kind of when I do a little check-in in the mornings. That's probably kind of the version of it is this who's here.
Yeah.
Kind of a who's here meditation, and a little mapping who's here this morning.
And so shifting gears a little bit, um, you know, IFS, as you know, is really sweeping the world right now. And yourself as a lead trainer, I'm sure you're aware of just how hard it is to get into trainings,
Yeah.
how most therapists and practitioners have waiting lists, full practices. What do you think it is about this model and this time in history that's making it just so incredibly popular?
Um, well, I think it's effective. I think um, that I think people are looking for ways to shift their suffering, and the repressive ways haven't worked. Um, so I mean they work some. They help us kind of like label it, and I can label my neurotic or my erroneous thoughts, but then what do I do with them? So I think it's given people a way to really unburden and release and heal those, and so they're not having to develop more elaborate ways to repress. So it's a non-repressive model, and I think people are hungry for connection, and these ways of protecting ourselves really breaks down our connection with other people. So I think largely in the pandemic has been um, very hard for people because I think more isolated and less community, and with that brings a lot of anxiety and depression. So it's a model that kind of helps us relax our protective mechanism so we can feel more connected to others or the world or community or nature. So I think people are hungry for connection. but I think
Yeah.
it's effective. And I think what I say when I teach IFS is IFS should really, if a therapist is doing it correctly, the client should feel a greater sense of understanding of themselves, and they should feel, because we're hungry to feel seen, understood, and valued. So that should be taking place. I hate to use the word should, because the potential of what could be happening is that we have a greater sense of connection to our own being, and we feel seen and understood, and greater complexities by our whoever's helping us with that, whether it's our coach or therapist or pastor or minister or spiritual director, or even or lawyer, or medical provider. So I think people feel that they feel seen and understood in greater ways, and the things that are really unacceptable within ourselves are not pathologized. They're seen as protectors. So if I can go to my therapist and tell them my most shameful aspects of myself, and have that seen in a way that is self-protective rather than pathological, it builds a greater connection and more potential for healing. So there's a lot of elements to it, I think, that people are finding beneficial, that have really kind of always been there. They've been there. They've been the components of psychotherapy. They've been components of spiritual direction. We just kind of haven't put them all together in this way before.
Yeah, I agree with you with how effective it is. And it's been so transformative for me in my own life, effective and gentle.
Mhm.
And there can just be really profound healings and shifts with ease over time.
Yeah, yeah. And some of it is can be kind of overwhelming a little bit, because when we introduce self to our system, all these parts of us that want to heal can really kind of rush the gates, and people can feel flooded a bit, because there's such a longing in our system to feel seen and cared for, that our parts can can rush us a bit in the beginning. So in that sense, the opening for care is, people can get a little overwhelmed, when they first start, and if we can kind of slow the parts down, reassure them there's plenty of time for them to be cared for, it begins to smooth out a little bit over time. But
Yeah, and just encouraging people to stay with it,
yeah,
because also I noticed that some people just want a quick fix, and sometimes there's quick shifts and healings, but generally, especially when there's a lot of trauma, it just takes time. And I love that the motto at IFS, that slow is fast, and
yeah,
just really needing to just slow down and take our time, be patient.
yeah. I got upset with something a couple weeks ago, and it probably took me, almost 72 hours to sort out what was I feeling, what parts were connected to it, what was the need underneath it, and then how do I communicate that in a self-led way. So I kind of on and off kind of sat with it at different times, and did mapping and sort of meditation, and just kind of listening to what was disturbing me inside. So I think that's a normal process. I think, so we're not the kind of supposed to be in bliss all the time. We're supposed to, we have needs, and they're gonna get distressed when they're not being met, or something is emerging that is developmentally calling us to something greater or bigger. So we're meant to have some distress, and it takes a while to be with it, to be informed by it. So I want people to, if it's, that's natural. It's not like I got some Superman self, and if I get myself, I'm going to be, regulated and blissful all the time. That's, it's, maybe if we live in Hawaii, then we don't have any stormy days, but I haven't figured that out yet,
But even there's stormy days.
Is there? Yeah, there can be
Yeah.
big storms, right? There can be
Yeah.
big storms that blow in. Yeah. So wherever you are, your weather system can have challenges. That's natural, and meant to be
Yeah.
that way.
think that's important to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for people who are wanting to learn more, or like about your critic camp or trainings that you lead, or just IFS, what would you recommend, or where would you lead them?
Yeah, I have so I have a new website that's getting developed. My website right now is one I put together myself with duct tape and a chewing gum, but I've actually hired people to put together one that's more operational. So that should be rolling out pretty soon. I've written a book on using IFS in groups, and one of my hopes is that people will form more what I call healing circles, where they can be together and do this work together. So the book is to support IFS being done in group formats and group settings, and to help. And the point I make is that for some reason our mental health system has leaned so heavily towards individual psychotherapy that we've lost the power of group. And so I'm hoping it'll at least nudge our mental health system back towards group a little bit more. And one of the issues that we do is we don't have access. We don't have enough IFS trained therapists for everybody that wants a therapist. Especially we don't have enough people of color that can find therapists of color. So I'm hoping that'll provide greater access, but I also think it's the way to do therapy is in group and community. That's the way we train it. So I think that's actually the way it's meant to be delivered. There is work that individual therapy is absolutely the way you should go, but there's a lot of this work we can do in community groups. So my website, it's burriscounseling.com, and it should be rolling out pretty soon. The book, my wonderful editor, and my wife's been my editor for finishing the book, and but my publisher, Ben Allen at Tonic Books, is working on the final elements of the book. So hopefully it should be out, and we're hoping to roll out in June or August.
Oh, great. I'm looking forward to this book.
Yeah. So my website, critic camps will be advertised on the website. I've got a number of those coming up next year, and also one on IFS and befriending our emotions in IFS. So for people that haven't been able to access a level 1 yet. So we're hoping, we're training therapists or trainers as fast as we can. So we're hoping to offer more trainings for people that want them.
Great. And Chris, in your own life, work, just in general, what's your current growing edge?
The two things that I coming back to, one, so I'm really interested in shadow work, and when I talk about people that are living with moral injuries, it's kind of what people do in a 4-step of AA, or the 12 steps. So I'm really interested in shadow work, and some of that is anti-racism, working with white privilege and white supremacy culture kinds of issues, but also just the ways that we carry moral injury, from our parts that were acted out in some way that injured other people. So that's a lot of where my interest is in, kind of really working on those shadow aspects of our being, and befriending those and healing those places, so that we're more compassionate, more connected, and just kind of better human beings. So
Important work.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for just taking the time to be with us today and sharing all that you have.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, Sarah. It was a lot of fun to be with you, and hope this is helpful to folks on their journey, and to be able to see people in person one day. So
Yes.
get back to that.